So I think there's a lack of historical information as to how we've gotten here, right? So if you look at a lot of people ignore the fact that, or are not aware of the fact that in 1964, the Republican Party made a strategic decision, right? So they realized that there were a significant number of Southern white voters who were upset over the civil rights movement. And then you had to, and so Lyndon Johnson's running for president. Remember, in 1960, all the Southern states went with Kennedy, which is not unusual. The white South had been voting Democratic since the end of the Civil War.
Right, Reconstruction. Yeah.
Right, Reconstruction. And then then Franklin Roosevelt even solidified it, because Franklin Roosevelt came with the New Deal program. And so the South was a big government region. The problem was they didn't want big government for black people. So when the civil rights movement took off, and Kennedy, after what he saw on TV was happening in Birmingham, and also after when he went to, he had a meeting with Khrushchev, I think in Vienna, or I know it was in Europe, and Khrushchev called Kennedy out on what was going on with Black Americans.
Khrushchev was the Russian.
Right, was a Russian leader.
Okay.
USSR. Actually, because it wasn't Russia
Soviet,
anymore. Yeah, the Soviet leader. Kennedy came back and
what was he calling them out about?
He was calling him out on, because Kennedy was lecturing him on freedom and rights for his people.
Right.
And Khrushchev was like, well, you have a large significant of Black Americans in your country that are living just like our people. So how are you calling me out?
Right.
And so Kennedy came back from that meeting pretty stunned. And then the other thing was Birmingham was happening. And so Kennedy's looking at TV on the news, and he's seeing all these dogs biting folk in Birmingham, and you had the firemen using the hoses on folk. So Kennedy proposed the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which he sent to Congress. The problem was in November, Kennedy was assassinated. So this was, I think, in June when he proposed the act. And by November, Kennedy was dead. Lyndon Johnson became president, who was Kennedy's vice president, and pushed the Civil Rights Act through Congress. So when Lyndon Johnson ran for president, he got Democratic nomination, ran for president. The Republicans put up Barry Goldwater. Barry Goldwater was opposed to the Civil Rights Act. Ronald Reagan, who later became president, left the Democratic Party in large part because he was opposed to the Civil Rights movement. He was opposed to the Civil Rights Act. He was opposed to the proposed Voting Rights Act, which hadn't even been voted on yet. In fact, he called the Voting Rights Act an humiliation of the white South. So the Republican Party adopted a strategy called the Southern Strategy, which was a way in which we can market a softness. We could take advantage of the white rage over civil rights to our political advantage. And they did that starting with Barry Goldwater, going on through Reagan, later on through Reagan in 1980. Now, at the same time, so before 1964, if you look at the South, if you look at the country in general, Republicans typically got between 32 and 35% of black vote, depending on the candidate. Democrats got about 60%.
Because it was Lincoln's party.
Well, it's Lincoln's party, but also because Roosevelt was the one who flipped it from, before that, blacks were pretty much all Republican.
Right.
And then after Roosevelt, because Roosevelt had the New Deal program. But the New Deal program, even though, some blacks were able, very few blacks were able to take advantage of the New Deal program in mass, because what Roosevelt did was all the money that was going into the New Deal program, he gave it to Southern governors.
What is the New Deal program?
So after the Great Depression, which happened in 1929, when Roosevelt came in, he put in all these programs to elevate, case in point, FDIC insurance for banking insurance.
Also like building roads and bridges.
Building roads and bridges.
It was like work programs.
Right.
It's like the WPA and
Yep.
and so like it basically like built out some of the infrastructure. So it's like the U.S. government like injecting capital into infrastructure and programs which like gave people jobs and such.
And he also did the GI Bill.
Yeah.
And they also did, the federal government was giving out low interest loans to folks coming back from Civil War, from World War II to buy and build houses. So yeah, that going on as well. But African Americans weren't really able to take advantage of those programs. But at the same time, some of us benefited from it. You had a lot of Morehouse students, especially when my dad was there, who took advantage of the GI Bill to graduate from Morehouse.
Yeah.
So the Black community, by and large, started voting Democratic, but it wasn't a massive. It was massive, but it wasn't super.
I mean,
massive.
those that could actually vote, because like in many places they couldn't vote due to like poll tests or like intimidation. So I would think that would be kind of.
Well, it was the rural area. Blacks had a harder time voting than in cities like Atlanta, cities like New Orleans, and things like that.
Yeah, because my family's from a small town, Louisiana, and so I have family members who were part of something called the League for what is it called? I know
what you're talking about. I know what you're talking about.
Anyway, it was a different approach to getting blacks like involved in being able to vote and voicing their like opinions and stuff. Your Deacons for Justice, yeah.
Well, my Uncle John was in Deacons for Justice. Yeah.
Exactly.
But that was also they believed in a militant response. Yeah. Too. But the thing is, at the end of the day, 1960, Kennedy and Nixon were running against each other. There was a big debate about who was going to carry the white vote, the black vote, because Nixon was actually pretty progressive when it came to civil rights. And if you looked at at that time, I'll tell you.
No, I don't know about that.
No, it's true, because Martin Luther King was debating over which candidate to roll with. The thing that, so when Nixon was Eisenhower's VP, remember Eisenhower sent the federal marshals into Little Rock, Arkansas.
Right, 1954.
Right, and Martin Luther King had gone to Africa with Richard Nixon. So Martin Luther King knew Nixon very well. And
because he appointed, what's her name?
Who?
Pat, to his cabinet. He had a black person in his cabinet.
No, that was when he was president.
Okay.
Yeah. So Nixon, so Martin Luther King said that Nixon's actually pretty progressive unless he's the most manipulative guy in the world. That's what King had said. So you have Nixon running against Kennedy. King goes to jail in Georgia. Remember, he's in, and then off a traffic offense, he was protesting Rich's department store with the AUC students. And they arrested him, sent him to first to the DeKalb County Jail, I think. And then he went to Reedsville State Pen over a traffic violation in Alabama. And Coretta Scott King and Martin Luther King's daddy, they called the Nixon campaign to see if they could get him out. The Nixon campaign really kind of was like, oh, we don't want to get involved in this because politically it could be rough. But they called Harris Wofford, who was working for the Kennedy campaign and who later became U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. And Harris Wofford reached out to Bobby Kennedy. Bobby Kennedy called Ernest Vandiver, who was governor of Georgia at the time, and Vandiver got King out of jail. And so
How long was he in jail for?
I don't know how long he was in jail for. I don't think it was like years or anything, but I think it was maybe a month. I'm not sure how long. But King got out of jail, and then Martin Luther King never really directly endorsed Kennedy, but his dad did. And his dad had previously endorsed Nixon, and then switched his endorsement to Kennedy. And so what ended up happening in that race is the urban black community supported Kennedy, the rural black community rolled with Nixon. And so that was like 32% breakdown. By 1964, the Republican Party had kind of left the civil rights movement behind. and started moving into more rightward bend. And so the black community in that race with Lyndon Johnson and Barry Goldwater, 84% of the black community went with Lyndon Johnson. I think 6% went with Barry Goldwater. And that began and at the same time though, the southern states of Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, and Georgia, and South Carolina all went with Barry Goldwater. So it's the first time since Reconstruction that those states went with a Republican.
So initially you're saying that the southern states historically were Democratic.
Yeah, they were.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. In 1964, that changed. And so to understand Donald Trump, you kind of have to understand Ronald Reagan. So what got us so after that, you had, and also you got to remember the Republican Party also had to sell the white South on what they were doing, because the Republican Party was a small government party.
Right, but Donald Trump was not always a Republican, right?
No, we're going to get to that later.
Yeah.
So
right now we're focusing on why blacks aren't voting.
well, because you got to understand the historical nature as to why they should be voting and not voting. After the Civil Rights Act of '64, blacks were voting in large numbers. You look at the mayor's race in Atlanta in 1973 when Maynard Jackson was running. I think it was turnout in the black community was like 91%. But yet when the latest mayor's race, which was in 2021, I think it was like 27%, 31% black turnout. So the thing is
that about apathy, or is that just?
It's a combination. It's apathy and also not understanding the history of how we got here. And the thing is, black people can affect elections greatly. Black women have done that definitely since 1964. But black men have to step up to the plate also. And part of our turnout issues are with black men. And the thing about Donald Trump is Donald Trump ran a campaign in which he demonized our community. He did it. Look, Donald Trump got on the political scene by calling the first black male president, Barack Obama, first black president, period, some kind of Kenyan nationalist who's not really an American citizen, which is a racist trope. You know, when he's running against Kamala Harris, you know, he called her everything from a hoe. He called her dumb. All these things. Called her a DEI candidate. So once again, he's attacking a black woman, and we all have black daughters. You know, I have a black mother. I have a black sister, and the mother of my children is a black woman. They're all extremely intelligent. They all understand, they're all extremely accomplished. And so for me, I had to vote because I have high self-esteem. And my self-esteem determined that I could not vote for Donald Trump.